The time is now for the Dr. Bob Sports Podcast. I am Tanner. I am our head of analytics, and I'm in my 8th year working alongside Bob to originate our NFL and college basketball bets. And today, as always, I am joined by our digital media specialist, Grant. Somehow, we have Tommy Cutlets back in our life.
Yeah, let's just start with that as our first segment. So let's head over to No-No's house in New York to talk about that dumpster fire that is the Giants offense. I mean, it looks like Daniel Jones is finally done because if he gets hurt while playing, they're going to have to pay him that $23 million to his 2025 contract. So I don't think that's worth the risk.
Yeah, and so actually people were talking about this in the offseason. I remember it was a topic in best ball, like, do you want to draft Daniel Jones because he might not be available in the best ball playoffs? But in the offseason, everyone assumed it would be Drew Lock coming in for Daniel Jones, not Tommy Devito. I'm shocked they're going with Tommy Devito as Brian Daboll is coaching for his job here. Devito has averaged just 4.2 yards per pass play in his career, and Drew Lock, one of the better backups in the NFL, right? He's averaged 6.1 yards per pass play in his career. He certainly looked good coming in for Geno Smith last year in Seattle. So it's just kind of a perplexing decision here for Brian Daboll. And I'm really not liking the matchup for DeVito this week. He averaged a league low 5.0 yards per pass attempt against the blitz last season. And Todd Bowles is going to bring a ton of exotic blitzes at him. Bulls defense, third highest blitz rate in the NFL. So it's just looking like it's going to be a disaster here for DeVito in his first start.
Yeah, and to add to that disaster, Giants backup right tackle Evan Neal is likely to surrender a few sacks here across from edge defender Yaya Diaby, who has 38 pressures, which is 16th in the NFL.
Yeah, and the thing to be concerned about for the Bucs defense is Zion McCollum could be sidelined this week. He's 17th in yards per cover snap allowed. So that's a half-point hit to Tampa Bay's defense, but it looks like they'll be getting back starting cornerback Jameel Dean, who's really all they need to limit Malik Neighbors. So I'm not liking maybe Tommy Cutlets gets the start this week. He looks so bad against Todd Bowles that they go to Drew Lock next week.
Yeah, you got to give him credit here. If you're going to tank, you might as well tank the fun way. But let's shift it over to our next segment here, which is the free bet of the week. And we are 14-5-1 on podcast sides and totals dating back to last year after the Rams took care of business in New England. So who are you going with this week, Tan?
Okay, I'm going to take the first half under 20 in the Houston-Tennessee game. So we sent this as a full game under 41 on Wednesday out to clients, but now that it's off the key number of 41, I'd prefer to play the first half. And 20 is a very key number in first half totals, to the point where if you could find a 20.5 at minus 130 or better, that would be better than playing under 20 at minus 110. So I would shop around and look to take some extra juice anywhere that you can find a 20.5. And even if you have to take the 20, 17 is the next most likely number this total lands on in about 8% of universes.
Yeah, and Houston looks like they're going to be getting back Will Anderson, who missed the last 2 games, and he ranks 7th in pass rushing efficiency.
And he's worth about a point to the Texans defense by our numbers. And Tennessee's offensive line, they already ranked 31st in pass block efficiency. It's going to get worse this week because not only is Anderson likely coming back, but the right side can't decide what they're doing there with Isaiah Prince and Nicholas Petit-Ferrer rotating at right tackle. Either of those guys is going to struggle tremendously across from Danielle Hunter, who ranks 4th in the NFL in pressures this season.
Well, the one positive has been that Will Levis has kind of started to show some rapport with Calvin Ridley, who's averaging 2.4 yards per route run since they traded DeAndre Hopkins.
He has, but the Texans have a shutdown corner to take away Ridley in Derek Stingley, who's 4th in yards per cover snap allowed. So now we're looking at, okay, the one thing the Titans can do on offense taken away, and a complete mismatch in the trenches.
All right, well, looking at the Texans offense, are you worried about C.J. Stroud having that bounce back game finally?
I don't think it's coming. I do think the Texans will bounce back eventually, but not this week because Bobby Slowick, offensive coordinator, comes from that San Francisco system that crushes cover 3. But Texans have averaged just 88% yards per pass play against two high compared to single high this year. And the Titans run the fourth highest too high safety rate in the NFL. So they're not going to be giving CJ Stroud those cover three looks he crushes with Nico Collins. And then the big, down point for the Texans offense this year has been that interior offensive line. That's the thing that's been holding them back. And the Titans have a great player to exploit that in Jeffrey Simmons, who's 12th in pressures this season. So our model predicts a total of 38.7. And then there's some matchup indicators on the under for this week as well in this game.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got stock up, stock down, and whose stock are you buying this week?
Christian McCaffrey and San Francisco's ground game is going to have a huge day on Sunday. So they're already fourth in yards per rush, and they're going against Green Bay, who has the worst rush defense in the NFL by our metrics. And getting back George Kittle to this ground game can't be understated. With George Kittle off the field this season, the Niners are averaging 1.2 yards before contact per rush. When he's on the field, that goes up a full yard to 2.3 yards before contact per rush. So Kittle is great in the pass game, right? He's second in EPA per target among tight ends, but he's also great helping the ground game. And so I think the 49ers ground game is going to have a huge day on Sunday against the Packers.
All right, well, whose stock are you going to be selling this week?
I'm selling the Lions offense stock. And I know. It sounds scary to say, but basically I'm just selling the idea that they're going to get up over 30 points. I think it's much more likely we see the Lions in the mid-20s than we see them in the mid-30s this week, because there's just a lot of things going on unsustainable for the Lions. Starting with last week, they became the second team since 1933 to produce a first down on half of their plays. That's completely unsustainable. 73% of Detroit's scoring plays have been touchdowns and not field goals. That's the highest rate in the NFL. That's completely unsustainable. And I think the Colts can do a couple of things matchup-wise to take away what the Lions like to do. Lions have been great against the blitz this year, but the Colts had the fourth highest standard pass rush rate in the NFL. And then Colts have one of the best nickelbacks in the league in Kenny Moore, and he should be able to limit Amon-Ra St. Brown on the inside, who's 8th in yards per target.
I really like that angle. I think that's smart. But let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got the injury watch, and the Cowboys have some good and bad news coming into this game in Washington.
Yep. So the good news is it looks like all-pro cornerback Deron Bland could suit up for his first game of the season, and they're likely to get back starting nickelback Jordan Lewis, who's second in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. But then you go to the other side of the ball. Dallas likely without tight end Jake Ferguson, as well as both starting guards, leaving backups to go across from Washington defensive tackle Deron Payne, who is 19th in pressures.
Well, looking at Washington here, it sounds like we're getting Jayden Daniels in a full week of practice for the first time in a little while.
Yeah, and it's you dig in, and it's that hip injury is hampered him a bit, right? He's averaging just 19 rushing yards per game in the last 3 weeks after averaging 53 rushing yards per game in the first 9 weeks of the season. So if Daniels is healthier now, maybe this Washington offense gets back to where they were in the first half of the season. I certainly like the way Washington can protect against Micah Parsons, because right tackle Andrew Riley ranks 13th in pass blocking efficiency. And then the Cowboys' other best pass rusher with DeMarcus Lawrence out is Osa Odigizua. He's 14th in pressures, but he's going to be contained against the best player on the Commanders' offensive line, right guard Sam Cosmi, who's 9th in pass blocking efficiency. And I like that offensive line to protect Daniels when he wants to go deep, but also to get out in the screen game, because Dallas is surrendering 0.38 EPA per target to opposing running backs, 30th in the NFL. And Austin Eckler is leading all running backs, averaging 1.95 yards per route run.
Yeah, and Washington's also going to have a favorable matchup on the ground. The Commanders are averaging, or they have a 45% rush success rate, which is 5th in the NFL, and the Cowboys are surrendering a league high 0.08 EPA per rush. So not a great matchup there. But looking at the Bucs here, they're finally getting back Mike Evans, but it looks like they've got some question marks on the O-line, and that's going against this Giants pass rush.
Yeah, and I'm not fully sure. It sounds like Mike Evans. I don't know if he's just going to be a decoy this week, but I'm not expecting some 10-target game from Mike Evans like we might see later in the year because Chris Godwin is out. Evans does have a favorable matchup across from Deontay Banks, but don't know if he's going to be able to fully exploit that matchup. Now, on the offensive line for Tampa, Tristan Wirfs has a case to be the best left tackle in the NFL. He leads all tackles in pass blocking efficiency. He was announced week to week going into the bye week, so I kind of thought he wasn't going to play coming out of the bye, but he got a limited practice in on Wednesday. So, his status is pretty important to watch here because it's either going to be him or backup Justin School across from Brian Burns, who's 10th in pressures among edge defenders. And then the Giants also could be getting back edge rusher Kayvon Thibodeau. He had 11 sacks to lead the Giants last year, and he had 2 sacks in his first 5 games before he suffered that wrist injury, and he's worth a half point to New York's defense by our metrics.
All right, well, looking at that 49ers versus Packers game, Nick Bosa left early last game, and he could be out. How is that going to affect this one?
I think it's huge. So, he was dealing with that hip injury coming into last week. And, I was watching that game closely because we had the under there. And Nick Bosa, when he went out, it completely changed this 49ers defense. And it's a big reason why the Seahawks were able to come back and win that game outright. Bosa has the second most pressures in the NFL this year. And then when he's out, the only real other threatening edge defender is Leonard Floyd, who's 17th in pass rushing efficiency, but he'll be pretty much shut down by Packers right tackle Zach Tom, who's conceding only 1.3 pressures per game. And, with this 49ers standard pass rush, they're the second highest standard pass rush in the league. It's not looking good without Bosa, just from a schematic standpoint, too, because the Packers are averaging 24% more yards per attempt against the standard pass rush than the blitz this year. So if Bosa's going to be out, it sounds like he's a true 50-50. We might not know until the hours leading up to the game. I certainly wouldn't want to be fading the Packers offense here, even though I think the number to make Green Bay, a 2-point favorite here, that seems a little bit high to me.
Yeah, the 49ers have been going through crazy bad injury luck, but let's shift over to the Patriots here. Yeah, let's shift over. Patriots, their D-line got a major upgrade last week.
Yeah, they get back Christian Barmore, who was dealing with those blood clots, but he played his first game of the season last week. And remember, Barmore, when he's right, is one of the best interior defenders in the NFL. He ranked 6th in pass rushing efficiency as a rookie, and he had 49 pressures last season. That ranked 14th among interior defenders. And Miami left guard Robert Jones has surrendered the 9th most sacks in the NFL, and Barmore might tack on to that total this week across from Robert Jones.
Well, looking at the Raiders secondary, they are in shambles, and they've got a red-hot rookie coming into town.
Yeah, so the Raiders are down to 3 backup cornerbacks in practice with Jack Jones, Jacorian Bennett, and Nate Hobbs sidelined. Now, I'm currently projecting the Raiders to have one of those guys back, with 2 of them likely out. I think Jack Jones might be the most likely to play, but if all 3 are out, that's worth nearly 3 points to the Raiders defense on a cluster loss there. And Jacorian Bennett ranks 6th in yards per cover snap allowed this year. Nate Hobbs ranks 7th in yards per cover snap allowed in the slot. So if those 2 are the 2 guys out, that's worth about 1.5 points according to our metrics. And then Raiders backup cornerback to Cameron Richardson is going to struggle across from Cortland Sutton, who has a league-high 5 receptions with at least 20 air yards over the past 4 weeks. And Bo Nix will have time to hit him downfield because Mike McGlinchey, right tackle, ranks 10th in pass blocking efficiency, and he should be able to limit Max Crosby there on the edge.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got the DraftKings player of the slate, and who are you putting in your lineup this week?
I think this is a Travis Kelce week, and I'm going to be putting him in my lineups at 5,800. The Chiefs are averaging 21% more yards per pass play against single high safety coverages than 2 high this year. That's 4th relatively in the NFL, and Mahomes is going to be able to find holes in this Panthers defense as they have the 7th highest single high safety rate in the league. And I don't think this is going to be a DeAndre Hopkins week because Panthers cornerback J.C. Horn is 9th in yards per cover snap allowed, and he should be able to contain DeAndre Hopkins. The Panthers are surrendering the 0.51 EPA per target to opposing tight ends, 29th in the league. And so I think this is a Travis Kelce week, finding the gaps in that Panthers single high zone.
Nice. We could use a big Travis Kelce week, but let's shift it over to the weather of the week. And Tan, you talked about how unusually good the scoring conditions were for a week 11 slate, and you said there should be overs in the non-divisional games. Well, those games ended up going over. It went 8-1-1 last week.
Yeah. So I hope you guys did take some of those non-divisional overs last week. And this week, I've seen a trend going around that I do actually put credence into, but maybe not for this Sunday. And that is that Chicago is 23-13-1 against the spread at home from week 10 onwards against dome or warm weather teams since 2005. But that angle works. Chicago's increased home field advantage late in years works because it gets really cold at Soldier Field, and that's not going to be the case this week against the Vikings. Looks like it's going to be almost 50 degrees, so I wouldn't be playing the cold weather late season Chicago angle.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how that angle kind of holds up here because Caleb really doesn't seem like a cold weather quarterback.
Yeah, and we'll see it come into play later in the year against, and it will likely be colder. So you're right. We'll have to wait and see how Caleb performs in those conditions. The other thing I wanted to touch on in the Weather of the Week segment is the rain in Seattle. That could affect the Seahawks downfield passing game, which has a pretty favorable matchup because the Cardinals looking like they'll be without starting safety Jalen Thompson, and DK Metcalf has 10 receptions on passes with 20-plus air yards. That's second in the NFL. So I'd like DK to get behind this Cardinals defense if the rain is not, coming down hard on Sunday. So that's certainly going to be something to circle back going into the weekend.
All right, well, let's shift it over to our next segment here. We've got our prime time preview with the Baltimore Ravens versus the Los Angeles Chargers, and you actually released a strong opinion on over 50 in this game.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of back and forth on this total, as there has been with Chargers totals all year long. Now, I would play it. I think there's value at over 50, but if you're looking at it at 51, I would not play the strong opinion. I'll just give you a prop to play later in the podcast, and you could just play that. But I do like there to be points here in the Harbaugh Bowl. The Chargers are 7-3 with the fourth best point differential in the NFL now, but I think the Los Angeles defense is massively overrated. They're the most overrated defense in the league according to our compensation algorithm because the Chargers have only seen 3 offenses ranked above average in yards per play all year. And one of them doesn't even really count. It was the Saints with Spencer Rattler. So it's really just 2 above average offenses all season. Meanwhile, Los Angeles has played 4 of the 8 offenses averaging less than 5 yards per play this season.
Yeah, and the Chargers defense is dealing with some injuries here. They've got linebacker Denzel Perriman and edge rusher Khalil Mack. So Khalil has led Los Angeles to 28 pressures before sitting out last week.
And he's big. And so is Perriman, honestly. We love Perriman on this podcast. We've been talking about it since the podcast started. So both those guys are out. It's worth at least a point. And I think it's going to be pretty easy for Lamar Jackson to move the ball here in ideal weather conditions with an ideal playing surface on Monday night.
Well, looking at this Chargers offense, it looks like Herbert is finally healthy, and they're really starting to click.
And I think that ankle sprain was hampering Herbert. You look at it, Herbert is averaging 37 rushing yards per game over his last 4 games, and he's now averaging 7.6 yards per pass play compared to just 6.3 yards per pass play in the first 7 weeks when he was kind of playing on that injured ankle. And so I think, it's fair to say the Chargers have maybe one of the better offenses in the NFL here with Herbert fully healthy and a favorable matchup because they target tight ends at the 7th highest rate in the league. And it looks like the Ravens might not have linebacker Roquan Smith, who left last game with a hamstring injury. So our model favors the Ravens here by 3.5 with a predicted total of 54.0.
All right, well, you are 20-11 on your primetime props. So what are you going to go with on Monday night?
I'm going to take Justin Herbert over rushing yards up to 24.5. So this was listed at 15.5 last week. And as we sit here on Thursday, I'm not quite sure where they're going to reopen it. But there has been a huge uptick in Justin Herbert's scrambling since week 8, signifying he's no longer nursing that high ankle sprain from week 2. He's averaging 37 rushing yards per game over his last 4. And I think that's going up on Monday night because the Ravens play the 10th most man coverage in the league. And they might even play more man coverage because they're not as confident in their zone with Malik Harrison in the middle there instead of Roquan Smith, who's likely out with a hamstring injury. And if the Ravens play a ton of man here, turning their backs to Herbert, I expect him to take off probably 5-6 times. They've been using Herbert more in the red zone as a rusher too. So I like Herbert over rushing yards on Monday night.
I love that pick. Well, I'm really looking forward to watching the Harbaugh Bowl, but I think that will do it for our Week 12 podcast. If you're looking for more content, head over to drbobsports.com. We've got our subscriptions and our free write-ups as well. So thanks for watching, and we'll be back next Friday to preview Week 13 of the NFL.